takes a few minutes to get everyone in from lunch. Have you noticed that?
Especially after lunch.
Yeah. I will give, so the big green button will advance it forward. So this advances the slide. And I'll just give it to you because your slide, the next slide is, don't do it yet, but the next slide is your title slide. It's
good.
Okay?
Good.
Great.
I will keep it short and simple.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, folks, if everyone can take their seats, we'll get started with the afternoon panels in about a minute or so. So if folks can funnel into the room and get their seats, that'd be great. Okay, excellent. This is, welcome to our afternoon session. This is actually this is an exciting panel. The title of the session is called Deployment Strategies at the Grid Edge. But as we were putting together the panel, we thought it would be kind of really interesting to get the perspectives of folks from actually around the globe who are actually deploying a lot of these particular grid edge technologies. So that's kind of who's represented here on stage. First, immediately to my left is Dr. Andreas Breuer from, he's the VP of New Technologies and Projects at RWE. Then we have Dr. Deepak Divan, President and co-founder of Varentec. Greg Rosen, Chief Investment Officer at Powerhive. Rémy Garaude Verdier, did I get that even close to correct? Okay, great, wow, okay. Smart Grids Manager from ERDF, and Stanislav Hess, Specialist for New Technologies from Distribuce. And with that, just to give folks a sense of how this session's gonna flow, we're gonna hear some opening remarks and some examples from Germany from Dr. Andreas Breuer, and then we'll have a panel discussion and also some time for a question and answer at the end. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Welcome. I'm really glad being here, not only because the weather is much better here than in Germany right now. What I'd like to show you is a little bit of a glimpse on what's going on in Germany, maybe also in the 8 different countries in Europe where RWE, which is one of the biggest utilities in Europe, is active on. So I'm responsible for all the, let me call it, future questions around infrastructures like electricity, gas, water, heat, and business models around retail. And before I start with my presentation, I think for you it's important to know that we have a strict unbundling. So we're active in the field of generation, regulated grid, and also the retail, but they are strictly separated. And maybe that can be found in the slides afterwards I'm going to show you. So welcome to Germany. That's the farm of farmer Hoffman. And this is a real picture. It's not a picture made out of Photoshop. That's exactly what you can find in rural areas. And this exactly describes what is the biggest problem we have, especially focusing the grid. So what you can see in that picture is that farmer Hoffman is doing more money out of energy production than with his conventional farming business. And in that area, and this is a typical area now for Germany, you will find 3-4 times the generation compared to consumption. And that's exactly the problem we are facing all over Germany. So what I'd like to show you is not only PowerPoints, not only use cases. I want to introduce you to my real life and solutions which we have established in our infrastructure. And to give you also a glimpse on the challenges beside farmer Hoffman, it's things like other companies focus our markets, our energy markets. Like you can see here on the top left side with Google. Google started a smart home initiative. Also what you see, and the discussion this morning went also around virtual power plants. Other companies entering and collecting generation unit in order to trade the generated energy. What you also can see is that There are some rumors about smart meter infrastructure, and this is one of the big topics in Germany right now, because if you compare that to other countries, we are still, since years, struggling with the smart meter framework. Time being, we are still waiting for a framework which allows us to roll out smart meter infrastructure. And to make it more confusing, if we talk, as a German, talk about smart meter, we talk about two sets of hardware. One is a dumb electronic meter, and the second one is a communications gateway. And only 15% of all our customers will have that communications gateway due to the will of our government that customers above 6,000 kilowatt hours of yearly consumption only get a real smart metering system. A typical household in Germany, it's not comparable to the US American market, is 3,500 kilowatt hours a year. So it's only 15% of all our customers. If we focus a little more in depth our challenges, what we see is that the renewables occur on a decentral basis, especially in rural areas, especially in the medium and low voltage area. We are, I think, world record holder on PV rooftop installations. What you also can see is that these installations have a long distance to our existing infrastructure. And we are forced by government to connect them without any question. We have to invest in our infrastructure in order to connect all the renewables. We are not allowed to say we are not willing to connect that due to the costs we have with that. We have to. And a very important challenge we also focus is that we are forced to speed up with the development of our infrastructure while waiting for the right framework. We have a cost and efficiency regulation, and that's exactly the problem we have with new technologies, which allows us, time being, not to introduce new technologies because it's out of the regulation system, more efficient out of their side to use more cables and more lines. And this is a paradigm shift. If you have a look at the Germans themselves, also the Europeans, they don't like new lines and new cables. So in brief, I skipped that slide to give you a demonstration on what's going on in the distribution grid. You can focus on the right side of the slide. Here you can see a real profile of PV, and you can see a real profile of wind. And you can directly see what the problem is. It's the volatility and the prognosis of PV and wind. Time being, we have roughly 30% of renewables in our grid. 30% which are totally volatile. And the question is, how can we optimize our infrastructure when having this kind of volatility in the system without building lines and cables? So what we did is, taking that photo again, what we established for Farmer Hoffman is we did not build up a second and third 20 kV overhead transmission line. So what we did is we bought voltage controllers for medium voltage and low voltage. And you see some pictures on that slide. The problem is these voltage controllers they've been shipped from New Zealand to Germany because these are very uncommon technologies to use in the distribution grid. For us, it was the first time, and also in Germany, it was the first time using such kind of a voltage controller. And the problem with that voltage controller was it's normally used in high-sensitive industrial production, like fiber optics production. And we had to pay roughly 1 million euros for this one set of voltage controller. Because also for the manufacturer, it was the first time to implement these kind of voltage controllers in the grid. And this was the big effect in that pilot project. Now the price is 1/3. And we can now afford to introduce more of these kind of voltage controllers. Why we use them? The question for us was whether to build a new line or new technologies introduction. And with this voltage controller, on the left side, you see the voltage line. You see the blue curve with volatility. And what the voltage controller does is it picks up the volatility, and at the outer side, at the output voltage is very precise 20 kV. So this helped us not to build up a new line. We could use that voltage transformer, and we get rid of a new line. And comparing the cost for building up a new line in Germany and the cost with the voltage transformer, for us it's much more cost efficient time being to use that kind of a voltage transformer instead of building a line. So we could get rid out of building a new line. So this reduced our costs. And we have a very precise voltage, because the biggest problem we have in the grid is the voltage interval due to the flexibility. We are forced to keep the voltage within plus minus 10%. And with the help of that kind of voltage transformer, voltage controller, we can cope with that. A second project which we implemented now on low voltage areas, we call it smart operators. So think that we do not have an overall perfect ICT infrastructure. So we do not have fiber optics all over the place. We didn't need that in the past. So the question for us was, on the one hand, build up a new ICT infrastructure through all the infrastructure, or ask ourselves, can we keep the data on a local base in order to have local decisions which are more or less autark or independent on what's going on a central basis? So without connecting data to a central control unit, we implemented a spider. Let me call it a spider, some kind of a box, a smart operator box, which is connected also to the households, to any generation unit, to any consumption unit. So consumption in that case means hot water, heating, and maybe dishwashers, refrigerators. But the biggest potential we see is the heating system and the warm water system in Germany. And this spider talks to any household in that area. And it also talks to the infrastructure in order to keep the balance between generation and consumption. And what that algorithm on an autonomous way does is he decides to switch on, switch off. He decides to speak to different households in order to keep generation and consumption in a balance. Let me tell you, it works. We spend a lot of time in developing that algorithm with different companies, and it works. And we are now at the stage that we want to spread that technology all over our infrastructure. And by the way, we are also looking for some pilots in the US market. And that's exactly why a colleague of me is sitting here in the auditorium. We have a team in San Francisco who wants to learn about your markets and also ask questions about our solutions, whether we can transfer, because this works for our challenges. What you see here is this type of local grid we talk about, or you could say it's a kind of a microgrid for the smart operator, and which is also attached now to EMobility. We are the biggest EMobility infrastructure provider in Europe, time being. And also, I learned from Rémy that we have some kind of infrastructure implemented also here in the US market. So it's a controllable unit which can directly speak to that smart operator. And to give you a glimpse on what's really going on in that area, you will find here that scheme and all the devices which are attached to the smart operator. The smart operator talks to a home energy controller, our smart home system, which is filled in by a profile of the customer. So the customer gives us his flexibility, but only the flexibility he's willing to give us. So that could be that the refrigerator's flexibility is only available between 3 and 6 in the morning, maybe. Or what we found out is that the customer wants to have 60 kilometers, apologies, I have to recalculate that in miles, but 60 kilometer reach in his e-car any time of the day. So assuming that, the question is how big is the potential for us to use the flexibility in a battery of an e-car? So what you can see is that we use existing technologies, which is very typical for all the roughly 40 projects which run in my department. We are not building up new technologies. We are screening technologies and try to figure out whether these technologies can be implemented for the distribution grid and also for our retail business. Since 2 years, for example, we have a virtual power plant on the market. We are collecting decentralized generation, and we are making money out of that. And also the customer is making money out of that. We introduced smart home applications with a controller to our customers, which we are selling right now on a constant basis. And they have interfaces which immediately could talk to the smart operator system, also immediately can talk to the infrastructure of e-mobility. And apologies for this slide, but that's my lighthouse project of this year. I'm very proud of that. That's our smart city solution. We have introduced the world's longest high-temperature superconducting cable. World longest in that case means 1 kilometer. Hey. So it's the first time that we introduced that cable. It's the first time that the cable is supplying customers. So nearly half of the customers' bases of a big city can be supplied by this small high-temperature superconducting cable. The load flow is 40 megawatts. So the big advantage we achieve with that cable is we could get rid of all the big 110 kV transformers in the inner city area. Space. We gained space. And also what we gained is that we have a very stable technology to use. We run that cable since 2 years without any evidence. So we have a potential in that city of about 20 kilometers, and the technology also can be easily transferred to other cities which have high energy density. And the problem for us is we have lots of cities where we have space problems and where we want to get rid of big infrastructures based on 110 kV. This runs with 10 kV. So we are ahead of this project will end of this year, and then we start with the rollout. And also I learned that there's some potential here in US, like Chicago is focusing on that kind of technology with 5 up to 6 kilometers. And we are in that team to make a knowledge transfer because we are the only one who have implemented that kind of cable in existing infrastructures. So coming to a conclusion, it's the triangle. All of you know that triangle. We have a very high security of supply. We have a very high reliability in our infrastructure. We have to keep that. Also, the customers demand that from us. But by the way, introducing new technologies, you also have to focus on the economics and the compatibility, which means every new technology has to fit in the existing system, and that is a huge challenge. And this is Farmer Hoffman, and as you can see, he's smiling. So I assume that we're doing a good job. in servicing him. So thanks very much for your attention, and I hope we have an interesting discussion in the panel session. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Andreas. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and I'm going to begin it first with Stanislav. How does your kind of situation compare to Andreas's in the Czech market? And then just in general, introduce yourself too in terms of Shez and the work that you do.
Okay. So at first, I would like to say that our situation in Czech Republic is quite similar. It's because Czech Republic is the neighbor of Germany, so what is happening in Germany is also happening in Czech Republic. At this moment, we don't have such a high share of renewables. Now we are at 13%, but this will improve significantly in next years. We see this. And for us, as a Czech distribution, we need to overcome the problems which are related to the same topics. So our main challenges are increasing share of renewables in the grid. That's the first. Then we also will face the problems with the implementing of smart meters. And also we need to fulfill the power quality. So that's the other topic, and we also need to increase the reliability of power supply for our customers. And what we are doing for that at this moment, we have some pilot projects which are focused on the specific topics. So our biggest pilot projects at this moment is Grid for EU project. Here we are focusing on the increasing of the reliability of power supply for customers. So basically we are doing this with the automation on medium voltage and also on low voltage. Regarding smart metering implementation, at this moment we have also some pilot projects. So we are working on this, but as Andreas said, at this moment there is not clear framework for it. And but the biggest concerns we have are about the increasing share of renewables in the grid. And for this, at this moment, we are developing a strategy. And the strategy is mainly based on voltage support, which will be provided by distributed energy resources. We see two strategies. One strategy is for medium voltage, and the other one is for low voltage. On the medium voltage side, we would like to be able to send required voltage set points from our center SCADA to the distributed energy resources, and then the distributed energy resource will consume or generate the reactive power. Thanks to this, we believe that we will be able to keep the voltage profiles in a limit. So that's the strategy for the medium voltage. And the strategy for low voltage is to use smart PV inverters in the future. Mm-hmm. I mean the inverters with autonomous volt-var controls and volt-watt controls. Watt controls mean that in case of overvoltage, the inverter will start autonomously to reduce active power. We are not a venture of this kind of functions, but we took the lesson from Austria Smart Grid project. They have successfully tested this kind of functions on low voltage with smart PV inverters. And one example, they were able to integrate 140 kilowatt peaks of PV under 160 kilowatt amperes of the secondary substation capacity. So it was quite impressive for us, and we would like to follow this way. So that's our, let's say, biggest issues or challenges which we are facing now today. And we as a DSO must be prepared for it. because we need to overcome this for a low cost. Otherwise, we need to increase distribution tariffs in Czech Republic, and this will not be acceptable.
Great. Rémy, you're facing a bit of a different issue in France. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I will not be very innovative or saying that in France the situation is almost the same as in Germany or in the Czech Republic. We are facing a constant growth of renewable. There is something very specific in France. 95% of the renewables are connected to the distribution grid. So for ERDF, the French TSO I'm working for, it's quite a challenge to manage such an amount of renewable connected to the grid. So we know that we will have to welcome more and more renewable connected to the distribution grid, like my friend from Germany and Czech Republic. And we are facing the same problem regarding voltage disturbance. If we look at the French Riviera close to Nice, the solar PV generation is so high during summer zenith time that we are facing a voltage outrange during the sun zenith time, and we have to manage it to control the voltage thanks to renewable energy resources like batteries. And during the pre-conference, my colleague Christophe gave you a complete view of what is going on in the Nice Grid project. But what I would like to mention or to add at the previous presentation is that the ERDF roadmap through smart grid, and that's probably a bit different from my colleague, is first based on the complete rollout of the smart meter. So for ERDF, we believe that smart meter, the nickname of ERDF smart meter is Linky. Linky is the first brick for smart grid. So we will deploy all the smart meter in France. It means 32 million smart meter because we are in charge of 95% of France. And in the meantime, we are doing some demo or demo project because we believe that a demo project or pilot project could give us very interesting and useful insights regarding how new technologies could affect reliability. For example, how the consumers are reacting in front of new technologies like the smart meter, like the online load curve and everything. And we also believe that the pilot project could help us to understand what it means to open up our system to new players or new actors. So ERDF roadmap towards smart grids is a 5-step strategy. The first is we do pilot project. The second one, we perform deep cost benefits analysis because, of course, investments in smart grid must make economic sense. And when it comes to new technologies, it's not granted. So we are performing this deep cost benefits analysis, and we are very careful with the implementation costs because when it comes to pilot project, it's still manageable. But if we start to scale up, its implementation costs could be tough. We are also looking at change management. I will not talk for my colleague, but in ERDF, probably like in most of the utility, there is an inherent conservatism. That's why most of the time we are hesitant to adopt new technologies. So that's why we are doing pilot project. Pilot project is discomfort with new technologies. So that's why we are performing them. And we are also looking for some fundings or financial incentives because it could help at least to reduce the financial risk on the project. The next step is about we have to accept the fact that in these technologies there is constant changes. And it may be tempting to wait the next generation before starting the rollout. But if we do the same, for example, if we want to buy a camera, there is always 2 options. The first option is we can go to the shop and buy the camera. The second option is to wait the next generation because the next generation will be better. But then at the end of the day, if we always wait the next generation, we will never have pictures. So that's the same with smart grid technology. We need to assess the technologies, then we need to take a bit of risk in buying them. Of course, standardization and interoperability will make the choice a bit more safer. And the last step is about regulation. if we look at the European landscape, we have good funding coming from the European Commission, like in the Grid for You project, or coming from national agency. We have committed stakeholders, utilities, universities, research center, equipment manufacturer. And we know, as DSO, our priorities. We know what we have to do to make the grid smarter. So what is missing in the way towards smart grid is a regulatory framework that will support this deployment. And I believe that to leverage further investments for the rapid development of smart grid, it's necessary to find the right balance in sharing costs, sharing benefits, sharing risks. And for me, the main responsibility for achieving this balance lies in regulator hands.
Great. Thank you. We're going to get into a bit of a technology discussion with Deepak, but first I want to just introduce Greg. Maybe you want to introduce yourself. You have a bit of a take on this from an emerging market perspective that I think will be interesting for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So my company is called Powerhive, and we are an energy delivery solutions provider for developing world markets. And we also are a developer. And so we actually, it's very interesting, we went out, we have an office in Berkeley, California, and also an office in Nairobi and also in the Philippines. And so about 3 years ago, our founders went out, built some pilot sites in Kenya, and the pilot sites were a mini grid consisting of solar, batteries, distribution lines, and then we did wiring right into people's homes and businesses, right into installing their light fixtures. And this is really sort of traditional rural electrification in an area in Western Kenya where about 75% of the people that are there don't have any power. And so those pilots have been running about 2.5 years. And a lot of the village chiefs came around to us and said, can you please put mini grids in our villages as well? So we worked with those folks as well as people at the federal level, and we actually just became, about 6 weeks ago, the first private regulated utility in Kenya. So we have 2 counties where we are going to be rolling out several dozen mini grids to about 100,000 people. And when we went out and we looked at the landscape for different technologies to deploy, we certainly found a lot of generation assets. We didn't actually find a meter that we liked, so we went and we hired some engineers and we actually built a meter for the developing world, which is a smart meter, but it's also at a cost-effective price point for what we need it to do. And then we also have some patented anti-theft technology that we built into it. And then we complemented that with software that does energy supply management and demand management, but we also integrated in allowing people to pay by phone. So it's sort of interesting in the large parts of the world, people might not have electricity, but they have cell phones. So we've been out running these pilots a couple of years, and energy is really a building block for economic development, and there are a lot of parallels to, at least as an American, to a place like Tennessee in the 1920s and 30s, where people didn't have electricity. They were basically stuck in a cycle of poverty, and in that case, the government went in and electrified those areas, and then, interestingly, businesses started to pop up, and that started to grow local development, and health outcomes improved, unemployment went down, and so forth. And we're seeing very similar things in our pilot areas, and we're looking in Western Kenya to see similar things happen. So it's not necessarily the focus of this conference to look at this, but we thought it would be interesting to come here when you look at the markets for microgrid technology, or if you're a utility and you're looking for new markets to grow, there are about 1.3 billion people without electricity in the world right now, and our technology and our approach is probably good for about 400 to 500 million of those people. So it's areas where there's a village, there's some farming around, maybe there's some light industry, and it's really been traditionally very expensive for existing utilities within these countries to be able to provide electricity. And so what happens is folks end up burning kerosene for light at night, and then they're walking very far to go charge their cell phones, and it's really hard to start businesses. So that's what we're doing, and we really see that the growth potential as the cost of all these different components come down is really going to make it a lot more cost effective, and we're going to see large-scale electrification in all parts of the developing world.
Great, thanks, Greg. So Deepak, we've heard a lot of what's going on in terms of deployment either in Western Europe or throughout the entire conference here in the US or North America or as Greg mentioned, in the emerging markets. But in terms of thinking about grid edge technology, are we asking ourselves the right question, or is there another question that we should be asking ourselves?
That's great. Let me kind of use that framework to kind of talk. Varentec itself is a company that builds grid edge management systems consisting of hardware, software platforms, and we've been kind of using these to deliver absolutely unprecedented performance right down to the grid edge. What it allows utilities to do is do all the things you talked about. I mean, how do you control it, without having multiple layers of systems out there? I think, it's really interesting kind of because if you look at how utilities have approached the problem, they've got a model of the system, and that model is, you control things from the central side, and it's a linear connected model, and whatever you do, presumes that everything goes down to the grid edge, and if you put something at the grid edge, it flows up. And I think our experience has been, as we've deployed these systems, is that doesn't really work, and it doesn't hold, and that's why there's so much of, anxiousness and anxiety, and very, very expensive solutions that are being put up. So I wanted to kind of share one slide with everybody. We call it, and we say that the utilities are missing a fundamental control layer. What does that mean? So if you look at how utilities have traditionally invested all their money, it's on the left side. Okay, it's the SCADA systems, now putting in DMS systems, the levels of distribution automation, and all of it assumes that, that model of the utility is calculatable. So you can calculate it, you can decide what controls you need to put in, and I've now talked to probably 25 or 30 planning engineers from different utilities and said, what's your model of that distribution transformer, the service transformer? And almost without exception, they say 99% power factor, 30% loading, because that's the thermal model, that's the planning model, okay? First time an air conditioner turns on, that is gone, okay? So this is showing real data, that red and green and yellow data, that's actual voltage measured on a feeder, okay? And this is without solar on it, okay? This is just normal stuff happening, okay? And, and then we've got, if you look at where utilities are spending their money today, 95% of the utilities in the US are not spending their money on solar. They're doing grid modernization, and 60% of the benefit of grid modernization flows from volt power control, the only two control levers that you have, okay? So they are really trying to control the voltage, but if your voltage is already occupying the band over which it can be, you really don't have much control space left. And it's one of the reasons why major initiatives like AMI are stumbling a little bit, because what was promised in terms of returns, couldn't be done. And you can see the voltages are really volatile, and it's different places on the grid, it's all happening. You cannot use one centralized lever to control it. You need distributed control. This voltage drop is occurring right across the transformer, okay? And so you've got to control the endpoint. So our solution sits really on the edge, okay, on the secondary side, okay? And you've got to now have 100 devices like that, all working together, all flattening the profile, and not talking to each other, okay? And that's kind of what the promise of grid edge control is. The smart grid has never been enough. So when people start talking of smart grid, you say, okay, now I have AMI and all this data coming in. Okay, every 5 minutes I can get data, but my capacitor only switches 3 times a day. Okay, so there's a disconnect in overall in terms of what we can do. So the lower chart, on the blue chart out there, actually shows voltage profile on the same feeder. Okay, with similar day loading, with these devices all operating. So the way we see it is there's a bridge out there that needs to be formed where you actually take the hard muscle devices on the edge that are kind of doing miraculous things out there and coordinate at the system level so that you get the medium voltage side performance and the low voltage side performance. You can now take that feeder and put 50% PV on it, and it works fine. Okay, so that's a whole new way of thinking about it, and that's been missing in the dialogue, I feel. Okay, because everybody who's planning to do grid edge, if they start from that side, they're just talking about, hey, putting more grid edge devices, and it's all going to magically flow through. And what we are really seeing is this. The other thing that we see is, from a deployment perspective, when we talk to utilities, this is a deployment session, right? A lot of the utilities say, okay, we're just going to put, another 100,000 devices, and it'll all flow into SCADA. Well, we just took the cost of integration up dramatically. Okay, this is supposed to reduce cost, not increase cost. Okay, so the way we think about this problem is you really need to have this army of devices, this fleet of devices that are self-coordinating, autonomous, and self-behaving, and simplify the whole operation of a feeder level unit to the extent that you can easily integrate with the DMS system, and you now have control all the way down. You don't need to complexify your existing system. In fact, the technology should make it easier and simpler and more robust and more resilient. So, deployment strategies are really critical, and I think, you kind of set the right topic, and it really comes about, you don't need back office. It needs to be incremental. I mean, you wouldn't, your systems don't have a huge back office when you're, setting it up, 3 years and $30 million before you see the first watt flow through, right? So that's the kind of thing that I think is required, and that's the promise of grid edge control. And I think, I'm being controversial by saying that, I think a lot of us are missing the fact that that's the vision that should be driving, grid edge controls.
GEMS, Grid Edge Management System.
Yeah.
New buzzword, people, Grid Edge Management System.
There we go.
I thought smart operator would be the
I
word.
have a number of questions, but I want to be cognizant of the fact that there's a varying group of opinions here on stage. So I just wanted to open it up to the audience and make sure that we incorporate your questions if there are any questions out there for anyone on stage. 1, 2. Do we have a mic runner? There we go. Perfect. Excellent. Mic's coming at you.
Hi, I'm a civil engineer, so a very visual guy, and it helped on a previous presentation when the guy was talking about devices coming on to Florida Power Light, if he showed me pictures, and I could see on the system what these things look like and where they're at. Is there anything comparable that you could have, or maybe explain on what this fleet of devices looks like out there in the real world?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a stainless steel box. It's about 30 pounds, 15 minutes to install. I think what we've been able to do is it's 0 to 10 kVAR VAR injection device. But to get it to work, we had to bring the losses down to 20 or 30 watts. Okay, so that's really about an order of magnitude less than what power electronics devices would typically be able to do. It just sits on the pole on the secondary side, and you connect it up in 15 minutes, you're done.
Great. I think there was a question right there. Yes.
Not so long ago, there was a solar eclipse, and obviously all of you are working with the integration of renewables. And so I know that all of Europe didn't go down, or at least we didn't hear about it in the United States. So maybe you could kind of describe how individually in each country you address that, that variable that went through and rode that one out.
So if I understood, the question is, so in planning for kind of more large events such as a solar eclipse, how that would be handled locally within each country?
Yeah, the one,
Solar
there was one a while
eclipse?
ago.
Solar
They
eclipse.
made it through.
So you're talking about what happens if moon goes over sun and some kind of things. That's a perfect question for me because we had one in March. It's like it was like being in a Hollywood film. It was really cool because we had a crisis room established. We communicated to all our customers, be aware there might something happen. All the massive of colleagues in the operational business have been aware and alarmed, and nothing happened. But there was a reason for that, to be serious. The problem we had was the time frame of that solar eclipse, that the sun rapidly vanished, and that more rapidly the sun came up again. And seeing that ramps, what we foreseen was that we needed some backup capacity due to the renewables which vanished or came up. And there was a lack of reserve capacity in that case. And the problem was in trading or buying that capacity, you only buy 15 minutes blocks. And you need to have various 15 minutes blocks in order to build that ramp. But that did not work because the ramp was much sharper or higher. But at the end, we've been allowed, and we are allowed to control solar and wind with an installed capacity above 100 kilowatt. So after informing the customers, we played with that, and everything went very well. But assuming now we have 30% of renewables, it will be much worse in the next year or in the upcoming years because it will increase the renewables in our system. And then I doubt whether it will be as smooth as it was this year.
Any other thoughts from folks on planning for kind of these more large-scale volatile events?
The eclipse was a good opportunity to improve our forecast algorithm. So before this eclipse, our forecast algorithm were not taking into account the eclipse effect. And thanks to it was the same in France and in Germany, the eclipse in March. It was a good opportunity for us to take in this eclipse in consideration. And then our algorithm for PV forecast are able to take in consideration the fact that an eclipse could occur in France.
Maybe I can add one short comment because for me it was a little bit funny. Because Italy saw the eclipse 10 minutes before Germany. And we feared, having a look at the market for reserve capacity, we feared that Italy was buying all the reserve capacities on the market, and we did not get one. But fortunately, this did not happen. But this was indeed the biggest fear we had, that Italy will buy all the reserve capacity, and we as a German cannot buy anything from the market.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something, Deepak?
Just a little bit. I mean, I think, more frequent events than eclipses, things like storms. I mean, so we've had instances in Texas where, a storm line came and, all the turbines, went down, and as a result, I mean, they almost lost power. We had the same kind of stuff happen in Germany. So those things, faults on the system. So those are things that I think are probably, more likely to stress everything out. But
Great. Other questions in the audience? I have a question, and I think I'm going to put it to Greg first, which is, so for folks in the room who are kind of, dealing with utility business models and structures that have been in place for 100 years, and you kind of essentially being very close to kind of being able to kind of build a utility from the ground up, what kind of thoughts or lessons do you have for folks who are kind of trying to think about how to retrofit for the future here in North America?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting. When I talk to folks, one analogy I use is that we're somewhat like the Southwest Airlines of utilities, in that Southwest sort of had the second mover advantage in the airline industry, and they came on and, you know, they made these really bold claims that the existing airline said it's impossible. They said we're gonna turn a plane in 25 minutes, and the airline said you can't do that. It's impossible. And the Southwest said we're not gonna give ticket assignments. And the airline said, that's crazy, there'll be chaos on the planes. And, you know, lo and behold, the market cap of Southwest at one point was, I think, larger than the 5 majors combined. So, but the advantage they had is that they really started at a later date. So really, you know, an interesting thing is that by using these smart meters, and integrating really the demand management, when you're sort of talking about, you know, how large utilities have to deal with these things, part of what we do is in our tariff design, we make sure that we're allowed to ramp down folks, but you know, the expectations are different. People and the customers that we're serving, they're used to getting power about 40% of the time, you know, 4 hours a day maybe for folks that have electricity. So we come in and we're like, well, we can give you power 95% of the time, but not 100, and they're thrilled. So it is different expectations, but I would say, you know, we're down at the circuit level. We manage the grid from Berkeley. We're going to be managing 100,000 folks from the cloud, and we have a good technical team on the ground that can respond to things with a network operations center, and we're dispatching. But what I think is interesting is we have a relationship through the cell phones with our customers. So we text them, we can survey them. We do a lot of surveys. We can give them some bonus money to spend on electricity. I think that we have more of a high-tech communication relationship with folks, and I think that we're a lot more, arguably more community-oriented, and we're really looking to sort of beyond sort of a token corporate social responsibility. We're really trying to be in those communities and help those communities to grow. So, for example, we're partnering with some microfinance organizations to help some of the entrepreneurs in the area start businesses. So now that there's electricity in the community, hey, let's start some business. And so there might be some interesting things there, going from really working with customers in a way that and communicating with them in a way that's sort of comfortable and now feasible. So certainly with the payment systems.
Great, thanks. I think with that, we will wrap this panel. Excellent panel, much different viewpoints than I think we hear on a regular basis. So please feel free to give the panel a round of applause. Thank you all.
Sure.